You might have never heard of the awkwardly titled Golf Magazine Presents 36 Great Holes starring Fred Couples due to it being a mid-90s golfing sim that remained exclusive to the 32X. However, its connection to modern gaming is undeniable, and the fact that it's generally considered one of the best 4th generation golfing sims makes this a game worth talking about. This is Retro Impressions, and today I'm going to answer what's the best golfing sim on the Sega trifecta. Brent Erickson got his start in the video game industry in 1983 designing games at Axis Software. He helped design some of their biggest hits including Echelon, Heavy Metal, and most notably Mean Streets, the first Tex Murphy game. After helping design the sequel to Mean Streets, Erickson would leave Axis Software in order to start his own game development studio called Flashpoint Productions in 1992. We're not quite done talking about Axis Software, however. In addition to the Tex Murphy series, they had one other series that was hugely popular during the early to mid-90s. It was Lynx Golf. Growing up, I owned golf on the Game Boy and really enjoyed it for many years. So by the mid-90s, it seemed logical to upgrade to something that could be considered state-of-the-art. Especially when I considered all the great golf-related releases that were receiving some of the highest praise in their most prominent review magazines. The options that were relevant to me at the time were Fred Couples on the 32X, Lynx Golf on the PC, and PGA Tour Golf 3 on the Genesis. I ended up going with Lynx as it was touted as being the game to own, and it brought me many hours of enjoyment. That game aside though, the question has remained, what is the best simulation style golf game published on Sega's trifecta? I'm going to answer that, but for now, let's turn our attention back to the 32X. Starting in the late 80s, Sega of America's president Michael Katz started a major push to sign professional athletes who could be attached to major games for endorsement purposes. As far as golf goes, Sega would develop 2 games using this approach, Arnold Palmer Tournament Golf on the Genesis and Fred Couples on the 32X. Well, Arnold Palmer was localized from a pre-existing game in Japan, with Palmer replacing the original endorsement of famed Japanese golfer Ozaki Naomichi for localization purposes. The 32X game was built around the endorsement of Fred Couples. Part of the process Katz would implement as a key part of the endorsement strategy was to utilize American-based developers who could better understand what the American audience desired in their games. This brings us back to the developer Flashpoint Productions. From 1992 until being sold to Bethesda in 1995, they would release 2 games, Noctropolis for the PC and Fred Couples Golf on the 32X. 36 Great Holes was developed on behalf of Sega and released in 1995. The production team behind this title was absolutely loaded with talent, including game designer, programmer, and project manager Guy Carver, who is most known as the lead programmer for Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim, Fallout 3, and Fallout 4. Producer Michael Maischeid, who would later work on games such as Crash Nitro Kart, Terraria, Payday 2, and one of my all-time favorites, Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons. Programming by Jeff Hughes, who worked on Fear 2, and Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor. The list goes on and on and on. The team wasn't huge, but nearly everyone involved in this game had great success going forward. One question you might have is just why did Sega pick Fred Couples over more prominent golfers of the era? I think there are a few reasons, starting with the availability of other famous players. The most iconic of all active golfers was Jack Nicklaus. His rights were held by Accolade, who had published a number of games using his namesake across a variety of systems, including the Genesis. Nick Faldo, who quite arguably had a better career and 2 games under his belt with the release of Nick Faldo's Championship Golf in 1992. However, beyond being unavailable, he also wasn't American, so building a game around him would defeat the marketing strategy Sega had set forth. Availability and nationality weren't an issue for Fred Couples though. Fred was American, and that was a huge selling point for Sega, as he was the first American to obtain the #1 ranking in the official world golf rankings that were established in 1986. He also won the Masters in 1992, making him fairly popular while qualifying him for this sort of gaming endorsement. The game itself is chock full of options with 6 competitive modes, 3 practice modes, and the ability to create your own player while customizing everything from the way you look to the material your clubs are made out of. The game cartridge has an onboard battery backup, allowing you to not only track the lifetime stats of your player, but 23 additional player-created golfers. It also allows you to save your progress mid-play. The most important part is also its best executed. That is, the actual golfing mechanic. The power meter is set on a percentage basis, making it a joy to figure out about where you need to stop it to get the ball where you want it to go. it's a simple system, yet it's better executed than almost any golf game from any era that I've ever played. As I don't want to bore anyone talking about the deep mechanics of this game, I'm going to move on to the common complaints part of this review. While the game is generally well liked, one of the biggest complaints is the lack of music. Time and again I read reviews mentioning the 3 random music tracks you get while browsing the menus. Funny thing is, they're not wrong. However, there are 10 tracks in total in what amounts to a fairly solid OST. I'm not sure why this never seems to get mentioned or why 5 of the 10 tracks weren't utilized outside of the sound test menu. Still, speaking directly to the lack of in-game music, I can't really knock Fred Couples for something that's expected when playing golf, and that's silence. Another minor gripe I've seen mentioned is the selection of courses. Actually, it's the lack of any courses because this game is made up of 36 random holes taken from a large assortment of courses. I mean, it's in the title. These are Fred's personal favorites. As far as my feeling on it, 36 random holes is acceptable for someone like myself who has no expectation of any specific course. For those who wish to play well-known courses as they would if playing in person, I can understand their issue here. The final hit this game takes centers around the lack of additional pros outside of Fred Couples. Your choice of selectable in-game players is Fred Couples, and that's it. If you don't want to create 8 players because you're limited on time, yet you have 8 people wanting to play this game, you're all going to be Fred Couples. Even though I find it amusing that the game is dependent on you to create the players to fill the rosters, this is hardly an issue unless you're a massive golf fan and truly miss playing as the greats from the mid-90s. So how does this stack up against the other options on the trifecta, and what's the best game overall? For the showdown, I wanted to select the best game from each system and pit those against each other to find out which one was the best. I spent a fair amount of time playing every golf sim game I could find. The 32X and Sega CD only received 1 golf game each, so they made the final cut by default. For the Genesis, it came down to 3 games. PGA Golf 96 was impressive from a technical perspective. It was beautiful, fun to play when the game wasn't loading, and it's very forward-thinking in its presentation and hit mechanics. However, there lay the issue. All this sophistication meant I waited more time for the levels to load than I spent hitting the ball, making for a very slow and eventually disinteresting experience. My runner-up was a Japanese exclusive called Top Pro Golf. I noticed this game divides people when discussing whether it's good or not. The reality is it's a bit on the shallow side, offering little more than you might expect with a Master System release. The key thing here is that it looks fairly good, and it's quite enjoyable to hit the ball around the course, something that can't be said about the majority of the remaining games I'm not going to mention. The game that's by far the best on the Genesis is PGA Tour 3. It features 8 courses, solid visuals, 4-player support, digitized pro players with their movements, and it contains 10 pro players to compete against, in addition to the 40 randomly generated players the computer offers. So let's rank them and find out which game is the best. Coming in third is Link's The Challenge of Golf on the Sega CD. It suffers from a couple of issues, with the largest being the long load times, similar to PGA 96 on the Genesis. It has some neat offerings such as the ability to load additional courses via a different disc, a feature I don't believe was ever utilized. It's also compatible with Sega's mouse along with the rare TV Golf Club. That aside, the gameplay feels extremely dated and slow-paced. This is a case of the developer relying too heavily on FMV, making me feel the budget and time could have been better spent elsewhere. This leaves us with our final 2 games, PGA 3 on the Genesis and 36 Great Holes on the 32X. While PGA might have the edge on course selection and licensed pros, Fred Couples dominates with its incredible number of options and modes that really add another layer of depth PGA lacks. This is a game that requires nearly a 70-page manual compared to the 30 pages it takes to cover everything PGA has to offer. 36 Great Holes allows up to 8 players, all of which can be custom made and controlled by people you might know or by the 32X. This is in comparison to PGA's 4-player max. The biggest win for Fred Couples is its ease of introduction and the system it implements to hit the ball. While the size of the manual is intimidating, I was able to pick this game up and understand the basic mechanics well enough to have fun after playing only a few holes. It's incredibly deep for those who know what they're doing and might benefit from the system that's there, but it's also very intuitive for someone like me who's never played a round of golf outside of a video game. After spending a sizable amount of time with a huge assortment of golf sims, a couple good games stand out with Fred Couples at the top of that stack, shining forth as the best option available across all three systems. I don't want to discount PGA Tour 3 on the Genesis though, as it's a good game in its own right, and it's worth picking up for those who don't own a 32X, or for those who desire that full course experience. In the end, 36 Great Holes is a fantastic game for what it is. It sets out to present a top-notch golfing sim and executes this job in a way that can still be enjoyed all these years later. However, I still can't recommend this to anyone except those who are already fascinated by this genre or by golf in general. There just isn't anything unique and interesting enough about any of these games to pull non-golfing fans in for the win. Thanks for watching. Feel free to leave a positive or negative comment letting me know your thoughts. Click subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. If you're interested in staying updated on upcoming projects and channel news, follow me on Twitter. Until next time, I'm Jenovi and this has been Retro Impressions and Reviews.